Hey there, my name is Angie, and I'm the founder of a nonprofit organization since 2004. I'm here on a cool, crisp, sunny day, just ready to run some errands, but thought I would pop on and introduce myself. Looking forward to visiting with you. My husband, Larry, is the author of the book, There's an Elephant in the Room, Exposing Hidden Truths in the Science of Health. And we will be delighted to share what we have come to understand and have worked with many thousands of people all over North America and in Europe as we share my experience, how I came from the brink of death to being able to live a very vibrant life. It's not something you probably have had any exposure to. It was quite shocking to us 20 years ago what my husband discovered as he started to research and study. And I have now lived for the past 20 years without even needing to see a doctor. I'm not against doctors. I'm grateful for the help that I had all the years that I was very, very sick and chronically sick and life-threatening sick. I had a lot of help. But I am just grateful to be living a very vibrant, very healthy life and haven't had a need to see a doctor. It's been wonderful. So we look forward to sharing some of those details with you. Stay on till the end of the call and we'll see you then. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Before we get started, I have a quick favor. I've been self-funding the Finding Genius podcast for 5 years now. I've done over 3,000 episodes. And as you can see on YouTube, we're up over 1 million views on the channel, which is fantastic. The next thing I really want to push on is to get up to 10,000 subscribers, because once we do, we'll be able to put a donate button and we'll be able to solicit donations to help keep the podcast running and to also get the Finding Genius Foundation moving along. We have a big project studying anxiety, depression, and PTSD and working on a product to help people overcome these problems, because I've seen them explode recently after the last 2 years of the whole virus situation. So if you would, please subscribe to the podcast. That would help us tremendously. Give us a thumbs up and check in the description for Buy Me a Coffee. It's about $5. If you could buy me a coffee, I'd really appreciate it. It would help keep the channel going, and I love coffee. Thank you.
Forget frequently asked questions.
Common sense, common knowledge, or Google.
How about advice from a real genius? 95% of people in any profession are good enough to be qualified and licensed. 5%
Go above and beyond.
they become very good at what they do, but only
0.1%.
are real geniuses. Richard Jacobs has made it his life's mission to find them for you. He hunts down and interviews geniuses in every field: sleep science, cancer, stem cells, ketogenic diets, and more. Here come the geniuses. This is the Finding Genius Podcast
With Richard Jacobs.
Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Finding Genius podcast. My guest is a couple. I have Angie and Larry Law. They're the founder of Angie's Option GRM, which means grassroots movement. So we're going to talk about exposing hidden truth in the science of health. And Larry was gracious enough to send me a copy of his new book. So we're going to talk about what they've discovered about health and what the real drivers of true health are. Larry is from Champaign, Illinois, a graduate of the United States Air Force Academy, Bachelor of Science in Mathematics. He got a master's degree in business administration at University of Missouri, and then a career in the Air Force working with nuclear missiles. Very interesting, space satellite systems. He retired in 94 and then went into teaching. So he's taught graduate and undergraduate courses for University of Phoenix, Colorado State University, etc. for about 18 years. So we're going to find out about, again, the true underpinnings of health. So welcome, both of you.
Hey, nice to be here.
Good to be here. Struggles and journey. So maybe talk about what happened to lead you to, see the importance of health and to see it in a different way than other people see it. Say, whenever anyone is concerned with health, they always seem to have their own health journey and health challenges. So what's some of the challenges that y'all have had that led you to be interested in health and to get this different perspective on it?
Yeah, so it is interesting because we do have a different perspective and unique position, but it started off very much like so many people. I was just chronically sick, got worse and worse and worse over the years. For about 15 years, I miscarried 6 times, and it just seemed like if something was going to happen, it was going to be to me. I was going to get it. But it came to the point where there was just simply nothing else I could do. I had 6 doctors. I kept accumulating doctors, 6 of them wonderful doctors, and 4 of them were specialists. We paid a nutritionist $400 a month trying to figure out, what I'm supposed to do with nutrition. We had no idea. But I continued to decline until there was, again, nothing else that could be done. And I feared that for my life. The last appointment I had, I remember talking to the doc, and the cervical biopsy had come back positive. And I said, what does that mean? And she was telling me, what the course would be, what we would be doing. And I just knew I could not do it. I had seen my stepmom go through chemo, radiation, and just die a terrible death. So I left that appointment saying to myself, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm not doing that. I had MS for 4 years. I had interstitial cystitis. I had severe infections with UTIs and yeast infections, and my whole self was just falling apart. And I, again, just drove away thinking something has got to change, and I don't know what it is. Well, it just so happened a couple of days later, I saw an article about sugars, and it said something like, can sugars heal? Something like that. And which made me curious because I'd cut sugar out for so many years, knowing that I did better when I wasn't eating sugar. So I thought it made me curious to see this little article. I was intrigued. I'm not a science person, but it was simply written, and I thought, maybe there's something to it. I know my husband is a science person. He's been all about science. Everything was science in his whole life. And of course, the United States Air Force Academy, a very scientific school. So I had him read the article. He kind of poo-pooed a little bit, and I was persistent, and he thought, okay, I'll look into it. And we'll have him share a little bit of the things that really struck him and why he continued to delve. But I will just finish with my story that because of what he started researching and discovering, he didn't discover anything. He just tapped into those that were teaching along these lines. And it was such a discovery to him that he didn't know anything about the field of the science of glycobiology, especially nutritional glycobiology. And so I remember, day after day, I kept not going to the hospital. I was in a really critical state. They were going to cut my sphincter, reroute my urethra through my belly button. I did not want that to happen. So I remember standing at his office 4 months into my journey with discovering critical key components that were missing in my diet, and even the best food that I could eat, it was gravely missing. And I stood at his office door and I said, how could there be something so significant and no one know anything about it? How could none of my 6 doctors direct me to a field of science that could answer the question, what was going wrong with my immune system? And my husband just stood there. He'd been studying, like I said, about 4 months, and I was sat there, and he said, as far as I could tell, there just doesn't seem to be incentive. And I said, what do you mean there's no incentive? And he said, there just doesn't seem to be any money. There's no money for anyone to be publishing these studies because there's no investment that can come back to them. There's no recouping their investment. And I said, are you kidding me? Are you telling me that I came so close to losing my life because there is no money to be made? And he just looked like incredulous. Yep, it looks like that's what it is. And I said, who is going to do something about that? If not me, then who? And he knew, and tears streaming down my face, he knew exactly what that meant. It meant that he understands it. And so I set up a class thinking, all my doctors are going to come. We're going to have a community class. And we had 68 people that first class in Colorado Springs 21 years ago. And yet none of my 6 doctors came. Surprise, surprise. I had enough confidence. I had total confidence, actually, but complete ignorance. And it turned out to be a good combination. So I am the drive behind it. I felt compelled. I absolutely had to do something about this. And my husband gratefully is smart enough and he can read very complicated things. And he studied over 40,000 hours before he even published his book. But I'm telling you, what he came to understand really changed the course of my life and our many thousands of others that we've worked with over North America and Europe. So I think it would be interesting for my husband to share what got him to continue studying. But go ahead if you have a question.
Oh, no, I was going to say, all right, so we'll hear from Larry next. Yeah, Go ahead when you guys are ready.
Yeah, let me share that the thing that was the aha moment for me was when I started learning in the science of glycobiology. I started learning about the ABO blood typing system. And being in the military, I knew my blood type, and I was a B positive, and I knew my wife was A positive. And so as I was looking at that and studying it, it turned out that there are sugars surrounding every red blood cell in your body, and they cover the whole cell like a forest or a beard, if you will. And they're just these whiskers that cover the entire cell membrane. They call it the glycocalyx because it's made up of these sugars. They're attached to protein or lipids, so they call them glycoproteins or glycolipids. But in this blood typing system, it turned out that type A and type B, there were 5 sugars on the surface that made up this typing system, and all of the sugars were the same except for one. I would say it was the last sugar, which they call the terminal sugar, and that was the only difference. Type B blood, I have a galactose sugar, and my wife has an N-acetylgalactosamine sugar. So that was the only difference. But I knew that if I got type A blood transfused into me, my body would have a huge problem with that. In fact, something wasn't done quickly, if I got too much of her blood, my immune system would kill all of those red blood cells that were type A, and I would slowly asphyxiate because I wouldn't have any red blood cells to carry oxygen to my cells. And so that got my attention. There's only one difference between type A and type B blood, and it's one sugar, but it has the power over life or death. Get it right, you live. Get it wrong, you die.
And we didn't get it right or get it wrong. What do you
Yeah, if you don't have the right sugar there, you're going to die.
What is the sources of the different sugars that could take up residence in those places?
Well, they come from our diet, of course, and the liver makes these sugars, but they come primarily from our diet. That's the primary way to get these sugars. But it was interesting to me to learn that type O blood, they're the universal donor, and they have the first 4 sugars are the same. In fact, type O, type A, type B, type AB, they all have the same first 4 sugars. But type A has that N-acetylgalactosamine, type B has galactose, type O doesn't have a 5th sugar. So that's why they can donate, because the immune systems don't respond because there's nothing there. There's no antigen, no problem with type O coming in. So they're the universal donor. And type AB is the universal receiver, and they are that way because they have both the type A and the type B glycoproteins, glycolipids actually, on their surface. So they can take either blood type, no problem. But it's type A and type B that you have to watch out for. So that just was remarkable to me that the body would pay that close attention to sugar. Sugar? Couldn't it have been a protein or something, significant? But it was a sugar, and it was one of these 8 sugars. And so there are these 8 sugars that cover every cell in the human body. And they turn out to be related to epigenetics, because these are the sugars, these are the things that turn genes on or off. So this is the language through these sugars, and they're simple sugars. There's 8 of them, only 8, but they are complex in the sense that they are not like proteins. They're not linear. The amino acids are linear, like little train cars, and they just connect from the front or the back, and that's all they do. Sugars, they are ring structured, and they're 3-dimensional. They're not 2-dimensional like protein. They're 3-dimensional. Now, protein can bend and turn, but it's train cars that are linked together, and they're 2-dimensional. Sugar is not. It's very complex, and that complexity is just amazing. And so as I started to read more about that got my interest, and I started to read what the National Academy of Science had said, and they had said that these glycans, or these sugars, they're found on every living cell. In fact, they're on all human cells. Every single cell in the body, all 40,000 human cells, are covered with a shroud of sugars. I like to think of it also as kind of like a flagpole. You have the flagpole is protein or lipid, but the flag is sugar. So you can have the same protein or lipid, but when you put a different flag on it, it represents an entirely different nation. And so there aren't as many proteins as the sugar combinations are a quadrillion. There are so many sugar combinations. There's not that many protein combinations. And so when they were doing the genome study, they discovered that, oh my gosh, there's only like 20,000 genes in the human genome. A Heinz tomato has, 37,000, and we're way more complex than a Heinz tomato. So what's up with that? Only 20,000 genes. But it turns out that they discovered that sugars are attached to those proteins. And that's what differentiates the protein to make it entirely different to the body. The body will read it completely differently. And so you can have the same flagpole, but put different sugars on it, and it means something entirely different.
Before we continue, I've been personally funding the Finding Genius podcast for 4.5 years now, which has led to 2,700 plus interviews of clinicians, researchers, scientists, CEOs, and other amazing people who are working to advance science and improve our lives and our world. Even though this podcast gets 100,000 plus downloads a month, we need your help to reach hundreds of thousands more worldwide. Please visit findinggeniuspodcast.com and click on Support Us. We have 3 levels of membership from $10 to $49 a month, including perks such as the ability to see ahead in our interview calendar and ask questions of upcoming guests, transcripts of podcasts you're interested in, the ability to request specific topics or guests, and more. Visit findinggeniuspodcast.com and click Support Us today. Now back to the show.
Are the sugars transient person, or are they always the same profile, or can they be a
Great question. Yeah, no, they're always the same. It's always the same 8 sugars. They never vary. Glucose, most people know glucose. Glucose is one of those sugars. Glucose is a fuel sugar. It's burned by the mitochondria and creates ATP energy packets, but it is also a structural sugar. So these sugars are not burned. They're not metabolic when they're used this way. So glucose, galactose, xylose, fructose, which is not fructose. It's not fruit sugar. It's something called fructose. N-acetylglucosamine, N-acetylgalactosamine, and N-acetylneuraminic acid, which doesn't even sound like a sugar. Those are the 8, and they are common to every human body. In fact, every human body, every cell is covered with those sugars. Every animal, every cell in every animal on planet Earth are covered with these sugars. Every bacteria and every virus, they're all covered with these sugars. If you're not covered with these sugars, you're dead. These sugars on the glycocalyx turn out to be the operating system of the cell. I used to think that when I went through biology class, that the nucleus was the most important thing. The nucleus is where the DNA is stored and the genes are read and all the instructions for things. And that's true, but it's not the most important thing, because you can denucleate a cell. You can take a nucleus out of a cell and the cell will live for months. Now, it will deteriorate over time because it can't go back in and read the DNA anymore and reconstruct things that it needs, but it will live. But you take away the sugars, any class of sugar on the outside of the cell, and that cell will die immediately. So it turns out that the operating system is a distributed operating system. The glycocalyx is where things from the outside dock with these receptors that are cell receptors. This is what we're talking about, glycoproteins, glycolipids. And they dock and they communicate. From the outside, they cause things to happen on the inside of the cell, and the cell goes and reads a gene. It does whatever it does. For example, the hormone insulin will be sent out by the pancreas, the islet cells, and it will come out when you've eaten a meal, because you need to get rid of the, blood sugar, and it's corrosive in the bloodstream. So the cells need to take it into them, create energy, and store it in fat or wherever it needs to go. And so the hormone insulin is what goes to an insulin receptor on these cells. So there are these flagpoles that are built for the hormone insulin. So they're called insulin receptors. They're made out of protein and sugar, a glycoprotein. And so that insulin comes in and docks with that insulin receptor. Now, if the sugars are correct, it docks and it sends a message. It does a conformational change, which means it just kind of bends and twists. And on the inside of the cell, there are proteins that are exposed that are now red, and they go into the DNA, they read a gene, then messenger RNA comes out, and they build, proteins, and they take action.
So does this mean like insulin resistance be the remodeling of the exterior sugars and the insulin sensitive areas of the cell, which prevents it from entering?
Excellent. Excellent. That is exactly it. If your sugars, it's like a key in a lock system. If your locking mechanism is not built properly, the cell receptor is not built properly, the hormone comes and it can't dock. And so the message to open the glucose floodgates don't happen, and the cell doesn't take in glucose. And over time, you get more cells that are like that. You become insulin resistant. There's nothing wrong with your insulin. The insulin's fine. The cell is not reacting to it. Why is it not reacting to it? Is because sugars are missing. And that's what the National Academy of Science said. Every disease, every autoimmune, every degenerative disease, sugars are missing from those cell receptors that are supposed to be there. And that is why you're in a disease state. When I saw that, I go, are you kidding me? Oh my gosh, that is huge.
How do you think the localized microbiome interacts with these sugars? Are there preferential ones that they eat or adhere to? Do they modify it?
Yes. In fact, it's a bacteria in the gut that actually digests these sugars when you come in, because they're part of the food that comes in. So they have to break it down. If you don't have the right bacteria in the gut, then you aren't very efficient breaking it down. But yes, 75% of your immune system is in your gut. And if you're not able to do that properly, your immune system is going to be compromised severely. And so those sugars are key. Yes, the bacteria is what breaks it down. And so your microbiome, if it's damaged, you're going to have problems with that. Now, the liver is a backup system. It can take glucose and it can turn it into mannose. It can turn it into other sugars, sialic acid. So it can keep you alive, but it's a backup system. And backup systems are not the primary system. So they're not designed to always be online. So over time, they will start to burn out and you will start to get tired. You'll start to have inflammation. You'll start to have chronic issues crop up that wouldn't have been there if you were, getting them in through the primary mechanism. So you're exactly right. That's a huge part of what happens. And what's interesting about cancer is that cancer cells, and this was from the National Academy of Science, they said altered glycosylation. Glycosylation is the body makes these sugars and puts them together. So inside the cell, when genes are read, amino acids come out, and in the ribosomes, they're made into protein. In the endoplasmic reticulum and the Golgi apparatus, sugars are added, and that's how you make glycoproteins. Now, so you got to have the ingredients in the cell to put them together, and if you're missing them, then you're dependent on the liver to supply them, and you're going to have some issues. But with cancer, altered glycosylation is a universal feature and contributes to pathogenesis and progression, which means that's why these cells don't die. They don't commit apoptosis. They don't go through programmed cell death. They stay alive because they are missing, their glycocalyx has been altered and it's abnormal. And every cancer cell has an abnormal glycocalyx. And so the immune system either can't read it, can't see it, can't take them out, and the cell itself doesn't kill itself, doesn't die, doesn't program itself to dissipate itself as they are designed to do. When cells get old, like red blood cells, they live about 4 months and then they commit apoptosis, which means they degrade themselves and they start to die, and new red blood cells are created because they get worn out traveling through the capillaries every 4 months. So new ones are always created and new cells are created all the time. So yeah, if that mechanism is not in place and not working properly, then the messaging, the signaling is not happening. So these sugars are not only, for the message, it's called signal transduction, meaning messages from the outside go to the inside and genes are read or turned on or turned off. And the interesting thing is that these sugars are not template driven, meaning they're not built by the genes like amino acids and protein are. They follow a template and they're built. These sugars are not built that way. These sugars are random. They don't even know what causes the cell to put these sugars together. in reality, what's happening is that they're responding to the environment. And so the cell responds to its environment and creates these glycoproteins. And so you have this whole language happening, which I think you've talked about with epigenetics. This is how the genes get turned on or off.
Well, I was going to say, this is like either part of the epigenetic cascade, maybe one of the first things, or it's like another order of epigenetics, like an epigenetic.
Yes, exactly.
Richard, let me jump in here, and Larry, because there surely are people in your listening audience that are like me, and I could not understand any of this early on. I've heard it plenty of times now. I could even speak to it, but 21 years ago, Larry is studying this. He's learning this, and I have no idea what in the world he's talking about. It doesn't make any sense to me.
Maybe he didn't want to sugarcoat it for you.
But I'm going to share with your audience the way that I could wrap my mind around it, and it made perfect sense, and it gave me hope. It gave me hope for my future. So what I learned is that these 8 specific sugars are very much like the vowels of the communication system that we use every day in our language. If we are not using A, E, I, O, U, we're speaking Czechoslovakian or something, and we don't understand this conversation. But we put those 5 little components in place. Now we understand our conversation. Well, these sugars within our body are very much like those vowels for the communication system within our body. You put these 8 specific sugars in place, and now the immune system says, oh my gosh, we need some support over here. We need some insulin support over there. It starts recognizing when these cells have gone bad and saying, hey, that cell is not supposed to become immortal, which then could become a cancer cell. That cell needs to be destroyed, and the immune system takes it out. When that communication breaks down because these sugars are not in place, when the body simply is guessing about everything. So why did I have degenerative and autoimmune in the same body? My immune system was confused. It simply could not communicate properly. You put these 8 little components in place, just like the 5 little vowels that we put in our alphabet. Now we get this conversation. Our body gets the conversation when those 8 little components are put in place. So those critical sugars became the very thing that gave me hope for my future. And I'll say one last thing, and then you ask questions in the last remaining minutes, whatever you'd like for Larry or me. But I remember as we started to just provide community classes, we've taught community classes all over North America and Europe. And I remember when Larry started teaching the advanced classes, which was more deep glycobiology for those science-minded guys like you and medical professionals and all kinds of people who can handle the deeper science. And we were in a class one time years into it, and I always am curious what health professionals come to class. And this particular advanced glycobiology class, the last man through the door, I asked him, as I always ask everyone, what's your specialty? What field, what is your field? And he said, oh, well, I'm a glycobiologist. And I just said, oh my goodness, we've never had a glycobiologist come to class. And he said, I just couldn't wait. And I said, how did you learn about our class? He said, well, somebody put the flyer at the glycobiology department where I work. And I said, people don't even know there are glycobiology departments around the world. And he said, you're telling me. So I said, well, I hope you'll stay on afterwards because I'd love to hear what you think. So after class, there were, 25, 35 people in the class, and most people came to talk to Larry afterwards. So he took me out into the hall and he said, and this is a direct, exact quote, kudos. I have never seen an overview of this field of science done that well. And then he went on to tell me that he'd spent his whole career and he was getting government grants to wrap up his career for studying the glycobiology of ovarian cancer. And I told him, this is what fuels me. My stepmom died of ovarian cancer and it just makes me so mad. And he said, this is another direct quote. He said, the evidence is clear. No attention will be paid until there is money to be made. And that's the bottom line. If you cannot recoup investment, why is anybody going to spend all the money. We fund this ourselves. We funded our work for 21 years because no one is doing it. I am compelled. I haven't even had to go to a doctor for 20 years, and it's remarkable, the human body. So anyway.
Okay. So what modulates, these exterior sugar coatings, and how does that interface with health? What moves the needle?
So the immune system reads these sugars. One of the primary things it does is it determines whether you belong in the body or not. So there's a set of glycoproteins that the body identifies that, yes, you belong in this body. And when people do get a transplant, they have to suppress that in order to keep the transplant, because the body will destroy it because it doesn't belong to you. You don't have the right fingerprint in sugars. So that is a huge part. Now, what happens, and Angie did such a nice job talking about, is when you're missing these sugars, the body can go lots of ways, and lots of times it goes both ways. Autoimmune is where the immune system cells come in and they try to read the sugars, but they can't read that identity. So instead of saying Larry's cell, Larry's red blood cell, or Larry's liver cell, it says Harry's or John's or Jack or something even worse. At some point, the immune system is going to say, I don't know what you're talking about, and it's going to attack. So the number one autoimmune disease is, of course, Hashimoto's disease in the thyroid, and the body just starts to attack the thyroid tissue and destroy it. It didn't attack it 2 years ago, but what's changed? Well, the sugars have deteriorated. You're no longer making them quite properly, and so you end up with an autoimmune disease. Now, degenerative disease are kind of the opposite. So degenerative disease, you'll end up with like a cancer. You'll get altered glycosylation. The immune system gets confused. Some of these sugars kind of act like cloaking devices. They can cover bad sugar proteins. It's really interesting what these abnormal cells can do, but they will keep the cell from dying. And so you'll have abnormal or you'll have degenerative kinds of issues, and the cell doesn't kill itself, doesn't die. And so you have degenerative or autoimmune, which pretty much covers the whole thing. But sugars are the key for the body to recognize who you are and your condition, and for almost every metabolic process to occur, like we mentioned, insulin and blood sugar. But every metabolic process involves these sugars for it to happen correctly. And if sugars are not there properly, you're going to start to have issues. Now, the body works to keep them as clean as they can, but over time, and especially as you age, especially on your diet, if you're eating a ultra-processed kind of food diet, you're not getting these. These sugars are available in nature. They're in root structures primarily. They're called bitters. They're plant bitters. They don't taste sweet. They have the name sugar, but there's nothing sweet about them. They're bitter sugar. But a nice example is aloe vera. Aloe vera, everybody knows, you put it on a cut or a burn, it stimulates the immune system to heal quickly, efficiently, faster than normal. Something about aloe vera. Well, 99% of aloe vera is the sugar mannose. If you know how to harvest aloe vera, you can get that mannose, and the mannose is what stimulates the immune system. So it's one of these sugars that has this power to stimulate the immune system to go and do. It stimulates macrophages, it wakes them up and sends them on their way to start doing the job that they are, because the immune system is basically kind of relaxed in most people, and it takes something to get the war games to start, to get it to start going. But mannose is very interesting because everybody knows aloe vera is wonderful, but you buy all this aloe vera product, potions and lotions, and they're virtually all junk. They don't work. And the reason they don't work is because the people who are manufacturing or processing don't understand that it's the mannose, a sugar, that is the helative property. And if you don't, it's a labile molecule, which means that if you don't know what you're doing, if you don't stabilize it within about 4 to 6 hours after harvest, it's gone. It's destroyed by enzymatic reaction. And so you've got aloe, but it's useless aloe. So once you get the real stuff, D-mannose, then you've got something that actually works and the immune system depends on.
Interesting. Okay. So getting these sugars in their proper, unaltered state or undegraded state, and then consuming them based on blood type? Is that the protocol?
No.
Well, not blood type, but you don't have to worry that specifically, but you do want to have a smorgasbord of good foods that you eat. You can also supplement them, but you got to make sure you have a real plant-based supplementation because, again, like the aloe vera, if you're not getting the real stuff, so waste of money. And probably over 90% of the stuff out there for supplements is junk. Vitamins, minerals that are synthetic and organic, they're not natural plant-based. The same with these sugars. You've got to have the real stuff. I would just mention one other thing that I found fascinating. Everybody knows that or has heard that red meat causes cancer. And, some people believe it, some people don't. But the answer to this actually is in the field of glycobiology. So it turns out that red meat does cause cancer if you eat it long enough. So you have to eat it sparingly, not all the time. And the reason is because sialic acid is one of these sugars. And there's about 40 or 50 different versions of sialic acid. There's a human version, there's an animal version. And it turns out that red meat, lamb, beef, pork, if you eat those, they have the animal version of sialic acid, which is not that different from human sialic acid. It's just some hydroxyl groups that are in a different position. It's not that different, but just like the galactose and galactosamine, it's different enough. And so when you eat a lot of that kind of meat, now chicken and fish is not a problem because they don't have this particular version of sialic acid. So that's why they never cause cancer. And so it's just the red meat. And so as you eat that, you get enough of that and they get incorporated into the glycoproteins in your body. And the animal version is actually inflammatory. So over time, your immune system is going to see that and say, that's not right. That's not right. That's not what I'm expecting for sialic acid. And it will start to pound on that and you'll go into an chronic inflammatory state. And that leads to lots of different diseases. So if you don't eat red meat, all the time, if you take a break and you allow your body to make the human version of sialic acid and incorporate that onto the glycoproteins, your cells are going to be happy. So it's not like you can't eat it at all, but you just have to understand that you want to eat it sparingly. You don't want to eat every meal every day. So I just found that was really, really amazing that the key to cancer in red meat was a sugar, and glycobiology actually explained it. And so that information is not really readily available to people. Pharmaceuticals know a lot about these sugars. They build drugs and they target cell receptors using synthetic versions of these sugars in order to target particular receptors. You can think of the mRNA COVID vaccine was one example. You heard a lot about the spike protein. It's actually a glycoprotein. It's not just a protein. It's a glycoprotein. It's the sugars that are the binding site on it. But anyway, so that whole binding process, how all that works, people are getting a little bit more and more familiar with it, but it's critical that, that's why we have tried to get this information out to people so that if you're informed, then you can decide what you want to do about it. Whether it's a vaccine, whether it's red meat or whatever it is in your life. But if you have the information, then you have a chance to make an informed decision. And that's what we've tried to provide for folks and why I wrote the book so that people could read it, understand why these sugars are lacking in our modern diet, why you don't get them. Used to be there, but they've been processed out. And for example, wheat.
No, honey, don't go into that because it's in the book and it's too much.
But I guess safe to say the right eating protocol, Angie, you experienced that it dramatically improved your health.
Yes, I did. However, I had been changing my diet for many years, 5 or 6 years prior to nearly losing my life. And it wasn't enough to get on top of everything that had been going wrong with my immune system. So I did have to supplement, and supplementing can be tricky because there's a lot of marketing hype and just blatant deception surrounding that as well. So our nonprofit, we vet companies, we vet products. Hardly ever a whole company is vetted, just specific products. And then if people ask us for our opinion, we're happy to direct to resources that we know are safe and trusted. But I began to incorporate.
But we don't sell them.
No, we're not
That's
selling. We direct to sources, and some of the companies will send thank you percentages to us for our nonprofit, but not all of them. We do it as a service. But I always say to people, watch the class, get an hour overview, understand what it is that you're doing, because applied knowledge is power. Not just knowledge, but applied knowledge is power. And then Larry's book is much more in depth. And when you understand, we haven't put any vaccines in our body. We do not, neither one of us are taking drugs. We have our shoulders, our hips, our, whatever, all of our joints, our knees, everything is in place versus.
And you're both 300 years old, right?
Yeah, exactly. But it's our age, our peers are not in the same situation as we are. And my dad is almost 90 and my mom is 87. And 21 years ago, I said, who's going to take care of you when you can't take care of yourself? It will be me. And so we're going to right now take care of you. Neither one of my parents take any drugs. Neither one of them they have sharp minds. They work, they walk, they dance. They are in such amazing, we have come to believe that we age with sickness and disease, and that is not the way we should be aging. We decline with age, of course, but we do not have to expect to decline with sickness and disease as we kind of believe in our day and age today. So.
Okay. So how can people take the first step? Like we've been all over the science and you've been very helpful in breaking it down. But for listeners that are bewildered still or want to take action, what do they do?
Well, the very first thing I would say is that
they should watch the class on our website. It gives a nice overview.
Yeah, you go to the website and there is a place to subscribe to our weekly newsletter. That would be the very first thing because it will share lots of things. We have monthly webinars, wellness support groups where people join us live. They can stay on after and ask questions. It's all free. We have on that newsletter, Larry always does a science article. There's a personal message. There are events that are coming up, whatever. People can tune in. They can reply to that email and ask questions. The Wellness Journey class is what Larry referred to. That's just the overview that is going to be such a great help because it's just under an hour, very easy to get a good foundation and not be like this, a fire hydrant at you when you're just needing a little drink of water, So going to the website, which is Angie's Option, GRM.org. So it's Angie, that's my name, Angie's with an S, option, singular, GRM for grassrootsmovement.org. We are a 501c3 nonprofit organization. And my option, Angie, my name is Angie, my option is education because I believe that I wouldn't have suffered for 15 years declining with sickness and disease, 3 autoimmune and degenerative in the same body, if I had had any hope of education. That's all it took for my husband to start delving in and saying, hey, wait a minute. And it changed my entire life. It took me about 18 months for my body to repair, restore a proper functioning, and I've never looked back. So that's what I would suggest, the first thing.
Okay. And then your book, let's restate the title and where is it available? And that would probably be another source for people, right?
It's on Amazon that you can get it or on our website. It's called There's an Elephant in the Room, Exposing Hidden Truths in the Science of Health. And the key is you're not a victim to your genes. If you can get these vital nutrients in, they build the structures. If you can build proper structure, then the body will function properly. So structure is function. And that's what's so simple and elegant is that you just have to build those structures and then the body is designed to respond and the immune system works wonderfully and takes care of you, whatever it is that you need. It's designed to do that for you.
Okay. Well, excellent. Well, thank you both very much for all the work you do and for coming on this podcast. And we've got follow-ups for people so they can go to the website, angiesoptiongrm.org, or get Larry's book as well, The Elephant in the Room.
On that website, the newsletter, signing up for that will be the easiest way to touch base and stay in touch with us, and then they can reply to that. It comes out every Tuesday, and if they have questions about our vetting process or anything, then they can ask, and we are happy to give our opinion.
Okay. Well, very good. Well, thank you. Thank you so much both for coming on the podcast. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having us on.
Yeah, our pleasure.
If you like this podcast, Please click the link in the description to subscribe and review us on iTunes.
You've been listening to the Finding Genius podcast with Richard Jacobs. If you like what you hear, be sure to review and subscribe to the Finding Genius podcast on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. And want to be smarter than everybody else? Become a premium member at findinggeniuspodcast.com. This podcast is for information only. No advice of any kind is being given. Any action you take or don't take as a result of listening is your sole responsibility. Consult professionals when advice is needed.